Hey everyone, this is a re-edit of the original Warhammer 40k tutorial videos we have on the channel, and they will mostly remain untouched as much as possible, though we will be removing any of the sponsors we had in those videos. Now, we've already gone over this a few times, and we're not going to do it anymore. We've got it in a community post, and that should be enough. But we are looking to restart the whole 40k tutorial series again, and there's no point getting rid of these videos, so we are going to bring them back as one big long video, which we're going to call the basics. All these videos cover the basics of how to play the game, but not being too complicated either. We will be doing more videos like the more advanced stuff like stratagems and terrain in the future, as an idea, if you get the idea. So it's perfect that these videos line up as the basics video, so enjoy the video. Welcome to Warhammer 40k 10th edition. Today we will be covering the core concepts of Warhammer 40k. This will include mission structure, units, dice, and the general basics of how the game works. In Warhammer 40k, two factions clash in tabletop combat. The mission in play will let the players know what their objectives are, any additional rules included, and how to set them up. When setting up missions, there is a step-by-step guide, whether you are using the Leviathan mission deck or combat patrols. For this example, we will use the mission Only War, which is in the core rules. The Eldar of Craftworld Senicia have arrived, scouting ahead of the war host for a tactical edge, their reason and motives unknown. However, the orcs of the Lootadoot clan have been encountered and are ready to fight.
Let's get looting!
All Eldar must answer the call.
Key locations known as objective markers will score points for whoever holds them, often at the end of the command phase. These objective markers will often be in places where combat will be heavy. Our factions present must be prepared. The orcs seize the initiative and go on the attack, leaving the Eldar on defense. The Eldar are led by Farseer Invan, who is protected by his squad of Guardian defenders. He wisely sends his Wind Riders to reserves to support him later up the field, while the rest of the force remains. Warboss Bunker Stomper leads his frenzied looting party towards the Eldar, intending to overwhelm and slaughter his enemies in brute strength. In this mission, the attacker deploys a unit first, and Warboss Bunker Stomper has sent out a mob of boys to look for the Eldar. The Eldar choose to remain vigilant and set themselves up behind terrain to close the gap. Both sides deploy in a deployment zone area, dictated by the mission. In the Leviathan deck, it is randomly generated, whereas Combat Patrol has deployment zones tied to the missions. Each zone is marked out for both the attacker and defender. Both sides are in position, and the factions roll off to see who goes first. It appears Invan has underestimated the Warboss, as he continues to seize the initiative. The Orcs go first. Neither side has pre-game abilities to resolve. The battle has begun. The game will go for 5 battle rounds, in which both sides will have a turn. Armies represent factions across the Warhammer 40k universe, from the noble Space Marines to the dreaded Necrons, from the sadistic Drukhari to towering Chaos Knights. Armies come in all shapes and sizes. Armies separate their models into units, from small teams to massive hordes. Unique characters often come as a unit, alongside tanks and monsters alike. Every unit will have a datasheet tied to them, which give you the unit's stats, abilities, core rules, and weapons. These datasheets also come with keywords at the bottom, which are used to interact with 40k's rules, stratagems, and abilities. On the battlefield, models and units will need to stay together in coherency. Small teams will have slightly more freedom to move, while hordes will often move in massive packs. Models who are taken out of coherency are destroyed at the end of every turn. Models cannot end their move within engagement range unless they charge, as these boys have. Engagement range is 1 inch away from enemy models, and 5 inch vertically for tackling enemies on a higher elevation. Battlefields are populated in terrain features, which aid units against long-range enemies, or offering cover to help the unit survive firefights. Terrain will also affect the visibility of models, which interacts with the benefit of cover. The Guardians have successfully held off the Orc hordes, but as is the case with Orcs, there's always more. The Guardians have spotted an approaching squad of Orc boys wielding shooters and have taken cover with the nearby barricades. The Orcs are a visible unit to the Guardians, and they remain stationary, firing their weapons. The Orcs begin firing back, shooters roaring. While some Guardians are behind the barricade, there are two who are not and are fully visible models. In addition, Death Copters have arrived, having landed right in the middle of the firefight, with the entire unit being fully visible. However, the Eldar are backed up by a Wraith Lord, who is making his way to assist his allies. To the Orcs, the Wraith Lord is obscured slightly, but remains a visible model. When measuring distances, you measure in inches. This is used for most interactions in the game, such as movement distance, weapon ranges, and certain abilities like auras. This will often be measured from the edge of a base. If a model like a tank has no base, the closest point on the model will be used. So with tanks like this battle wagon, you will measure from its hull. If a rule or ability specifies within certain distances, it affects everything within, and no more past the specified distance. This Death Dread has been slain, and has exploded from a fatal hit, hitting the nearby Orcs with the Deadly Demise, a core ability on most larger units. Thankfully, the nearby Warboss is uninjured, as they are not within 6-inch range for the Deadly Demise. Warhammer 40k uses dice to determine the game. Dice are used for nearly every interaction, from advancing, using weapons, and defending yourself from incoming damage. Only d6s are allowed to be used in 40k. Certain rules require a d3 to roll. This is a d6 roll which is halved, rounding up as shown here. Some abilities in the game allow you to re-roll dice, however you cannot re-roll a re-roll. Finally, there is sequencing. In any situation where two or more rules would activate at the same time, the following happens. During the battle, the player whose turn it is decides the order. Before or after the battle though, players roll off to determine the order. This concludes the core concepts of Warhammer 40k 10th edition. Next time we will be covering the command phase. Welcome to Warhammer 40k 10th edition. Today we will be covering the command phase. The command phase is the first step of the player's battle round, and by far the shortest. At the start of the command phase, both players generate a command point. Note that past this point of the phase, players cannot gain more than one command point per battle round. Some leaders give command points at the start of the command phase, while others may refund them, like these Voxcasters. Any abilities that would give command points at the start of the command phase are not counted towards the limit, while any abilities outside this phase do. Armies are likely to have abilities that activate during the command phase. Astra Militarum's army rule, Voice of Command, is an example. The officer in this army will give out buffs as described on the ability during the command phase. Be sure to check your unit's abilities beforehand to avoid missing out on some buffs or tricks to keep ahead of your enemy. Once the command section ends, you move on to Battle Shock. Units over time will be injured and wounded, and morale can break. An infantry squad has fallen below half strength recently and requires a Battle Shock test. When doing a Battle Shock test, roll 2d6 and compare them to the unit's leadership profile. To pass, you must roll equal or higher than the leadership value. If you pass, nothing happens and the unit can continue as is. If you fail, the unit is battle shocked until your next command phase. Units suffer penalties while battle shocked. They cannot claim objectives as their objective control value is set to 0. They must take desperate escape tests if they fall back from an enemy unit. And they cannot use or be affected by stratagems. To understand when a unit may be subjected to a battle shock test, we will go over the unit compositions quickly. Starting strength is the number of models the unit has at the start of the game. In most cases, this is usually between 5 to 10 models. For example, if a squad has 10 models to start with, its starting strength is 10. A unit like the infantry squad will need to take a test when it falls below 5 models, as its starting strength is 10 when the game started. However, a nearby Lehman Russ has been badly damaged and is below half strength. Single model units like tanks and characters instead take battleshock tests when their wound count is below half. Speaking of characters, many of them in Warhammer 40k are able to join friendly units. If a character joins a squad, they raise the starting strength by however many their starting strength is, as some leaders come in squads of their own like this platoon command squad. In this instance, Cadian Castellan Angelos has raised his infantry squad's starting strength by 1. Thus his unit is now a starting strength of 11. Should the infantry squad or leader be destroyed, the starting strength is reset to the surviving unit's starting strength. So if a sniper took out the leader, the infantry squad would be returned to a starting strength of 10. Once the battleshock tests are done, this will end the command phase altogether, where some units may have abilities to use at this time. Welcome to Warhammer 40k 10th edition. Today, we will be covering the movement phase. To begin with, players can start selecting units to move across the battlefield. Units outside of engagement range are able to perform normally, while units in engagement range are restricted to remain stationary or fall back. When moving units, they cannot move through enemy units. This includes points of the model for units that do not have a base. Units may freely move through friendly units, however, but must be able to finish their move without overlapping or on top of another model. However, vehicles and monsters cannot move through each other, but may still move through other unit types like infantry. As long as units are able to move without overlapping or on top of another model, then the unit is clear to move. There are different types of moves that a unit may use and affect what they can do. Remain stationary forces the unit to not move, which can benefit certain weapons or keep a unit in engagement range. Normal moves are pretty straightforward, using the movement characteristic of a unit's stat line to move inches equal to the listed stat. For a Chaos Legionary, their movement is 6 inches. Faster units like vehicles may move around 10 to 12 inches. When performing a normal move, you cannot move into engagement range of an enemy. Advanced moves allow the unit to sprint across the battlefield at a faster rate but with penalties. Units that advance add d6 to their movement for that phase. When a unit advances, however, they cannot perform shooting attacks or charge. Fallback moves are only available when you are in engagement range of an enemy unit. When falling back, you move equal to your movement characteristic, but if you are forced to move through an enemy model, you must take a desperate escape test. This applies to every model in a unit.
Squad broken!
If a unit is battle-shocked, models must take a desperate escape test regardless. Each model can only be subjected to one desperate escape test that phase. Whenever units move across the battlefield, it's likely you'll come into contact with terrain. Terrain features that are 2 inches or less can be moved through as if they were not there. If it's taller, units can climb over it by moving vertically with the unit's remaining movement. Be aware that a unit cannot end its move mid-climb. If a unit cannot successfully climb a terrain feature, it cannot climb it, and will have to either remain at the bottom of the terrain or move somewhere else. Some models have the fly keyword, such as the warp talons. Models with the fly keyword may move through enemy models and enter engagement range, but must end their move outside of engagement range. In addition, vehicles or monsters with the fly keyword may move through each other as well. When interacting with terrain, you instead measure through the air, simulating the flight of the model, which allows the unit to get across the battlefield easier than grounded units. Some units are capable of entering the battle later on. Players may have units prepared to deploy either from the sides using strategic reserves or the deep strike ability. These Chaos Terminators have arrived to surround the Astra Militarum forces. During the reinforcement step of the movement phase, the player whose turn it is can deploy units as described from their abilities. Units that come onto the battlefield by these methods are considered to have made a normal move. Units are still able to shoot and declare a charge when they arrive from reserves. Units that fail to come onto the board before the battle is over are considered destroyed, so don't forget them. Once the reinforcement step is over, the movement phase will move on to the shooting phase. Before we end the video, we must also talk about transports. Every faction will often have dedicated transports to make use of. Chaos Space Marines have the Chaos Rhino, capable of transporting large squads of warriors across the battlefield. A transport will describe what it can carry, as with the Chaos Rhino, which can carry up to 12 models but cannot transport Terminators, for example. Units can be set up in these transports during the battle formation step of the game setup. Some transports come with the firing deck ability, which allows specific numbers of models to fire their weapons from within the transport. Note that when firing these weapons, the transport is considered to be firing the weapon, meaning any abilities that the unit embarked would benefit from will not transfer to the transport. For example, the Legionaries have an ability that allows for reroll wounds, but because the Rhino is shooting in their place, the Rhino cannot reroll those wounds. Units can embark onto transports if they have enough transport capacity. To embark, every model in the unit must be within 3 inches of the transport. A unit cannot embark on a transport if it has already disembarked from that transport this turn. A unit may embark after a normal move, advanced move, or fallback move. When a unit disembarks, set up the unit within 3 inches of the transport and not in engagement range. If any model cannot meet these requirements, the whole unit cannot disembark. Units that disembarked from a transport that hasn't moved yet or remain stationary can act as normal. Be aware that a unit that disembarked cannot choose to remain stationary. Units that disembarked from a transport that has moved deploy as normal, but cannot move or perform a charge, but may still shoot. If a transport advanced or fell back that phase, embarked units cannot disembark.
Baneblade!
If the transport is destroyed while any units are embarked, the unit inside must disembark the transport before it is removed. If the transport has the Deadly Demise ability and explodes, the unit that disembarked is not affected by it. Once the unit has deployed, roll 1d6 for each model in the unit that disembarked, and on a roll of 1, the unit suffers a mortal wound. When a unit is forced to disembark this way, they are penalised. The unit is battle shocked and further suffers the penalties associated with it. Units count as having made a normal move and cannot charge that turn. If the disembarking units cannot deploy, it must perform an emergency disembark. The unit is allowed to move 6 inches from the transport instead of 3. However, the unit suffers a mortal wound for each roll of 1 to 3, instead of just rolls of 1. Thus ends the movement phase. Next time we will be looking at the shooting phase. Welcome to Warhammer 40k 10th edition. Today we will be covering the shooting phase. Armies across Warhammer 40k's universe bear arms of different potency and use. Armies like the Tau may have longer ranged weapons to keep an arm's reach, while armies like the Orcs will often have weapons that fire more shots to compensate for their poor aim. In the shooting phase, you can select eligible units to shoot. For a unit to be eligible to shoot, they must not have advanced or fell back that turn. To select targets for shooting, models in a unit must be in range with their weapons against enemy units. For these Necron warriors, they have Ghost Reapers which are 12-inch range. 5 at the front are in range of the Battle Sisters, while the remaining 5 must either select another enemy unit to shoot, or not shoot at all. Models with more than one ranged weapon can target different units with each weapon as well as the same target. For example, this Doomsday Arc has 3 different ranged weapons, the Doomsday Cannon and 2 Ghost Flare Arrays. The Doomsday Arc chooses to fire its main cannon at the Immolator tank ahead, while choosing to use each array against the 2 Battle Sister squads approaching. Be aware that while some weapons have multiple attacks, they cannot be split across different units. So while the Ghost Arrays have 5 attacks each, those 5 attacks must target the selected unit for shooting and cannot be split down to fire one shot at the 5 enemy units nearby. When making ranged attacks, the models will roll dice equal to the attack's characteristic of the weapon being used. If you target more than one enemy unit with the same unit, you must resolve all attacks against each enemy unit one at a time. If you are shooting more than one ranged weapon from a unit, you must resolve each weapon profile one at a time. So for instance, again with the Doomsday Arc, the vehicle has decided to attack a large squad of Battle Sisters with all its guns. When attacking, the Doomsday Arc would need to resolve the main cannon either before or after its Ghost Flare Arrays. An important thing to remember is that anytime you are attacking an enemy, it's possible you might knock them out of line of sight. When the unit selects an eligible target to shoot, it will be allowed to use all its weapons from that point, even if the unit was knocked out of line of sight by one of its other weapons. With the Doomsday Arc, the Battle Sisters have been knocked behind this building as only a few were in front of it. As the vehicle was eligible to shoot, it is allowed to continue attacking the unit with its remaining weapons. Units in engagement range are not eligible to shoot. Units also cannot shoot at enemies in engagement range. However, Vehicles and monsters are the exception. Both are allowed to shoot as normal, even while in engagement range, but at -1 to hit, unless the weapon has the pistol ability. These units may also shoot into the unit in engagement range of them. Units may also shoot at vehicles and monsters in engagement range, at -1 to hit. Be aware that units like infantry in engagement range with monsters and vehicles may still not shoot. When shooting weapons, a model will hit on a ballistic skill of the weapon listed on the datasheet. A weapon will always miss on an unmodified roll of 1. However, a weapon will always hit on a roll of 6, which is also a critical hit. Critical hits always hit and interact with some weapon rules that we will cover in a separate video. Weapons can be affected by hit modifiers. These Necrons are under the effect of an ability that gives them +1 to hit. This will buff their attacks to hit on 3+ instead of 4+. Enemy units may also have abilities that make it harder to attack them. The Immolator tank ahead has used the smokescreen stratagem to shroud itself against attacks, applying a -1 to hit. Hit modifiers can never be worsened or increased past 1. When an attack hits the target, you must then roll to wound them. To wound the target, you must compare the strength of the weapon against the toughness of the target unit. To determine what you need to roll depends on these stats. If the strength of the weapon is double or more than the target's toughness, the result will wound on 2s. If the strength is greater than the target's toughness, it will wound on 3s. If both the strength and toughness are equal, it will wound on 4s. If the toughness is greater than the strength, it will wound on 5s. If the toughness is double the strength, it will wound on 6s. Some abilities in the game, much like hit modifiers, can affect wound rolls. This works exactly like before, though affects wound rolls instead. Just like before, wound rolls cannot be worsened or increased past 1. Now that the target unit is forced to make saving throws, they will begin to allocate which models will be taking saving throws. Any model in the unit may be allocated the wound, even if they are not visible. However, if a model is already wounded in a unit, they must take the next wound. When models are wounded, they must make saving throws. Sisters of Battle wear powerful suits of power armor, which can help them wear off firearms, unlike units like infantry squads or orc boys. To roll a saving throw, you must roll equal or higher than your save characteristic. For a battle sister, it is 3+. If any models roll under their saving throw, they will take damage. Unmodified rolls of 1 always fail, and armor saves cannot be increased past 1. Some weapons in Warhammer 40k are extremely powerful and will rip through armor with ease. Weapons have AP attached to them. Most firearms have 0 AP, but specialist weapons will often have them. The AP of a weapon affects the saving throw of the target, so a Ghost Reaper's AP -1 causes the Battle Sister's armor save to be reduced to a 4+. Armor penetration can force armor saves into an unsavable state, as the Doomsday Cannon has an armor penetration of AP 4. And will cut right through power armor with ease, as its save is now 7+. It's inevitable that your units will take damage. Certain weapons deal high amounts of damage, while firearms often do the bare minimum. Any models that fail to save take damage equal to the damage stat of the weapon. If a model is brought to 0 wounds, they have been destroyed. Damage does not spread across models, so firing anti-tank guns at hordes is not a recommended strategy. Once you've finished the shooting phase, the next step is the charge phase. Welcome to Warhammer 40k 10th edition. Today we are covering the charge and fight phase. Across Warhammer 40k, armies may have access to close combat specialists to back up their army. Some armies are more melee oriented like the Orcs or Wild Eaters. To begin with, units will need to be able to charge into melee. During the charge phase, you can select any unit to charge. To be able to charge, a unit must not have done any of the following in the previous phase. The unit advanced or fell back that turn. It is already in engagement range of enemies. It is an aircraft unit. To perform a charge, you select one friendly unit and then one or more enemy units to charge into. You then roll 2d6 and add them up. That is your charge distance. For a charge to be successful, the unit must be able to move into engagement range of the target unit. If you selected multiple units, you must be able to reach all the units you selected. You must not enter engagement range of enemy units you did not select for the charge. Your unit must remain in unit coherency. If a unit completes a charge move, they gain the Fight First ability. When charging, it's possible enemies will have hidden behind cover. When moving through cover, you may move freely through terrain that is 2 inches or less in height, and may climb over terrain that isn't. When charging with models with the fly keyword, you may move through all models when charging. In addition, When they charge, it's possible the target is on higher elevation. When measuring the distance, you instead measure through the air instead of trying to climb the terrain. This ends the charge phase, but next up is the fight phase. In the fight phase, there are two steps the phase is split into: the fight first step, and then afterwards the remaining combats. Units that have the fight first ability or gained it by charging this turn will proceed to attack the enemies in close combat. In most cases, it's unlikely to run into enemy units with fight first, which means that all your units that charge this turn should be able to attack the enemy before the opponent can react. These steps will alternate between players, starting with the player whose turn isn't taking place. This means if you charge into a unit with fight first, that enemy will be attacking you first, so take extra precaution. Units cannot opt out or pass melee, they must fight if able. At the start of a fight, models not in base-to-base contact may move up to 3 inches towards enemy models in combat with them. This is called a pile-in move, and models must end their move closer towards enemy models in combat. So long as at least one model in the unit can get into engagement range and remain in unit coherency, the unit can perform a pile-in move. Once the unit has moved past the pile-in step, the unit may then make melee attacks. To determine who can fight in melee, a model must be in base-to-base contact with an enemy model. Friendly models in the same unit can also fight if they are in base-to-base contact with a friendly model that also is in base-to-base contact with an enemy model. The player then selects their melee weapons for that unit to use. If a model has more than one melee weapon, it can only use one of them in melee that turn. Then you select your targets. Just like ranged weapons, melee weapons will have a certain number of attacks. However, unlike ranged weapons, you can split attacks with melee weapons across different units. For a model to be able to attack enemy units, it must be in engagement range of the enemy models you wish to attack. If you are suddenly knocked out of melee before being able to make any melee attacks, you may choose to consolidate, but you cannot make any melee attacks this phase. Once you've selected targets, you may then make attacks. Just like with ranged weapons, you will hit the enemy on a hit roll equal to the weapon skill of the weapon being used. If you have more than one melee weapon available, you must resolve each profile one at a time. If you knock the enemy out of combat with one melee weapon before the rest of the unit is able to attack, you may still resolve their attacks against that unit as they were able to beforehand. Just like with ranged weapons, you will wound on rolls depending on the strength of the attack versus the toughness of the target unit. Once the unit has finished making its attacks, the unit may consolidate its models up to 3 inches, similar to how it would in a pile-in move. If the unit cannot reach an enemy unit in engagement range, it must move closer to the closest objective marker to the point where it is within range of it. If none are possible, the unit does not make a consolidation move. Repeat the process until every unit in combat has fought and the fight phase will come to an end. This will also end the player's turn and move on to the next player. Welcome to Warhammer 40k 10th edition. Today, we will be looking at core abilities. A unit will have core abilities listed on their datasheet. In this video, the Drukhari and Space Marines will help inform us on how these rules work. Firing deck allows the transport to use weapons from its occupants and fire them at targets. The Drukhari Raider has a firing deck of 11, which means up to 11 models from the embarked unit can fire one of their weapons. Remember that the transport is firing these weapons, not the squad inside, meaning rules like hazardous affect the transport instead. This also means that units with abilities that affect their attacks will not work while embarked. Models with this ability cannot be targeted by ranged attacks outside of 12-inch range. This converted Kavian Shrike has the following ability. If that model joins a unit, its ability is disabled until the character separates from the unit. Units like assassins or stealth-oriented characters will often have this rule. Support characters like Tech Marines may also gain the rule when near vehicles. Units making ranged attacks against a unit with stealth have a -1 penalty to hit. Every model in a unit must have stealth to benefit from this ability. These mandrakes are often shrouded in an evil aura that make them harder to hit. Units like forward scouts and support units often have this rule to help them survive, rather than use armour or sheer toughness. Each time a model loses a wound, they may roll a d6 for each point of damage from the result of the attack. If they roll equal to or higher than the result of the ability, they prevent 1 point of damage. So if a model is hit by a damage-free attack, they would need to roll 3d6 and attempt to block the incoming damage. Raks have this ability, making them tougher than their fellow cruel allies. When a unit is destroyed with this ability, on a roll of a d6 they will explode and cause mortal wounds equal to the ability. Every unit within 6 inches will suffer mortal wounds equal to this ability as mentioned prior. The Drukhari Raider has been brought down and has exploded, hitting a nearby squad of witches and the marines who destroyed it. Units that disembark from the destroyed transport are not affected by the deadly demise. A unit with the Fight First ability is able to fight in the Fight First step of the fight phase. That is a lot of fight in a sentence. This means if you get charged with this ability, you'll be able to fight first, as the player whose turn isn't taking place gets to pick the first combat in this step. The Succubus has an ability that gives it fight first, allowing it to respond to the marines that have approached her. Units with this rule can be placed into strategic reserve during the battle formation step of setup. Every model in the unit must have Deep Strike to perform this. When able, they can arrive on the battlefield anywhere 9 inches away from enemy units. The iconic Terminators of the Space Marines have this rule to teleport into the battle. Units with the Scout rule may make a move equal to the ability in inches before the first turn begins. This rule can allow for aggression and defense depending on the situation. Every model in the unit must have the Scout rule to perform this move. Space Marine Reavers are able to scout ahead as the vanguard of the chapter. Units with this rule may also give their transport the ability, allowing it to move up as well. Units also cannot move within 9 inches of enemy units while performing a scout move. Units with this rule can be set up anywhere on the battlefield instead of just the deployment zone. Every model must have the Infiltrator's ability to do this. Mandrakes make use of this ability to stalk the enemy and lock down key locations of importance. This rule is often placed on smaller units designed to either sniper enemies or scout objectives. Characters with the leader ability can be attached to units as described on their datasheet. When a character is attached to a unit, they will remain with them for the whole game. If the unit is destroyed, the character is separated and acts as their own unit from then on. If the character has a different toughness to the attached unit, attacks will use the bodyguard's unit's toughness to determine the wound rolls. Characters cannot be directly attacked while in a unit, and even if they lost wounds prior, they do not take further wounds from any other attacks that would normally go into wounded models. If the bodyguard unit is destroyed and there are still wounds remaining to resolve, the character must still make saves against them. Both Space Marines and Drukhari come with a host of leaders designed to assist in different scenarios. And that is all the core abilities in 10th edition. Next time we are looking at weapon abilities, which help give unique attributes to many weapons across Warhammer 40k. Welcome to Warhammer 40k 10th edition. In today's video we will be covering weapon abilities. In the grim dark future of the 41st millennia, there is only war. To fight those wars, armies across Warhammer 40k are equipped with various weapons ranging from the humble lasgun to the titan-killing volcano cannon. Both ranged and melee weapons make use of the abilities we are going to go over today. But when looking for the abilities your weapons have, you will find them on the unit's datasheet. They will be attached to the weapons you have access to. Weapons may not have abilities like the bolt gun, but these abilities may be given out by friendly units if able. Such examples like the Space Marine Lieutenant, which gives the lethal hits ability to a friendly unit it's attached to. That being said, let's dive in. Weapons with this ability are allowed to shoot their weapons after advancing. The bolt rifle has the assault keyword while the bolt gun does not. The intercessor is able to move and attack the enemy ahead while the tactical marine cannot. This allows the unit to rush up the field and get into range, as well as apply pressure on key locations. Weapons with this rule are often placed on short-ranged weapons or onto units that are designed to be mobile. Weapons with this ability add the number of shots equal to the value of the ability to the attacks of the weapon being used while within half range. For these Orc Boys, its shooters will gain an extra attack at 9-inch range, while the Orc Boy's big shooter will gain 2 extra shots at 18-inch range. When a unit is hit by a weapon with this rule, they cannot claim the benefit of cover. This is very powerful against lighter troops who may need to use cover to keep themselves alive, or units that gain bonuses from just being in cover. These Eldar Dark Reapers are masters of death, able to hunt their enemies regardless of cover. Weapons with this ability may reroll wound rolls. It's very straightforward and is often on units with paired weapons such as the Immolator's Multi-Melters. This can make weapons much more of a threat to tanky units, as the second chance to wound can inflict more wounds than the unit is used to. This ability is also pretty lethal on softer targets, overwhelming them in saving throws. Models equipped with pistols may shoot into engagement range with enemies already in melee with them. They may shoot even if another friendly unit is in combat with them. However, unless the model is a vehicle or monster, models cannot fire any other weapons that don't have the pistol ability on them. Units like Space Marines in general often carry pistols on them, which allow them to quickly throw some shooting attacks into melee. However, they will often only use their primary weapons like bolters to engage enemies. Some units only carry pistols like Orc Boys. Weapons with this ability will automatically hit the target when fired. These are often attached to flamethrowers and other short-ranged weapons. This makes them excellent at Overwatch as they automatically hit the target regardless of ballistic skill. However, you cannot score critical hits with this weapon, so lethal hits will be wasted on torrent weapons. The Sisters of Battle often make use of torrent weapons, even down to their standard troop choices. When an attack scores a critical hit, it will automatically wound if the weapon has this ability. A quick recap on critical hits. Any attack that hits on an unmodified roll of 6 will cause a critical hit. This normally does nothing on its own, only being a guaranteed hit regardless of ballistic skill. Lethal hits will skip the wound step of the attack and go straight to the saving throws for the opponent. This ability is helpful for getting through tougher units with larger quantities of attacks that may struggle to shift them in the wound step. Eldar Dire Avengers have this rule on their primary weapon, often using a sea of lethal barrages to cut down the infantry. Weapons with this ability gain +1 to wound when the unit makes a successful charge move. This buff is very powerful on its own, allowing the user to trample over smaller units or put them on even ground with a larger target. Orc Squighog Boys have this rule on their stickers, allowing them to skewer infantry to pieces while hunting larger targets like tanks. Weapons with this ability may fire at units outside of their line of sight. If the target unit is completely out of sight, the user suffers -1 to hit and the target unit gains the benefits of cover. Artillery units are often given this ability on their guns, such as the Basilisk tank of the Astra Militarum. Weapons with this ability may attack character models that are attached to a unit. If the character unit is made up of more than one model, the attacker gets to select where the attacks will go. If a unit contains 2 characters in a unit, you can choose which character to attack. Units with sniper rifles like these Necron Deathmarks can use these to remove buffs given out by characters in a unit, making it easier to secure victory. Some characters may also have precision like Boss Nikrot, who uses his daggers to stab at enemy commanders. Weapons with this ability gain an extra attack for every 5 models in an enemy unit. This ability is always placed on weapons with randomly determined attacks such as D6s or D3s. If you accidentally shoot up the unit with secondary weapons like the Basilisk has, don't worry, as the blast is affected by how many models were in the unit when you selected it as the target of the unit's attack. So regardless of the fact that these 20 Orc Boys have been reduced to 18 Orc Boys, you'll still gain 4 attacks on the cannon for the 20 Orc Boys that the unit had at the start of the shooting. Blast weapons cannot be used against enemies in engagement range, the risk of self-damage is too great. Weapons with this ability gain more damage equal to its value when in half range of an enemy target. Multi-melters gain +2 damage when at 9-inch range, for example. Weapons with this ability gain +1 to hit when the unit remains stationary. Large heavy guns like the ones on this Devastator squad have this ability to help them focus their normally unwieldy nature in an optimal way. Bolt rifles also have this ability to ensure they land attacks on closing in enemies. Some weapons in Warhammer 40k are unstable, often presenting risk to its users. This can often represent psychic attacks or weapons like plasma guns that supercharge. When a model or unit has finished making its attacks, you must roll a d6 for each weapon with the hazardous ability. On a roll of 1, the following happens. One model with that weapon is destroyed. If the model is a character, monster or vehicle, it instead takes 3 mortal wounds. The iconic plasma weapons of the Imperium are infamous for having this ability. As of the balanced data slate of 2023's autumn update, Devastating Wounds were completely reworked. Weapons with this ability will cause devastating wounds on critical wounds. Just like critical hits, these are on modified rolls of 6, only this time it's for wounds. Devastating wounds cannot be blocked by saving throws, including invulnerable saves. Note that Feel No Pain is not a saving throw and is the only way to defend yourself against these kinds of wounds. This ability has been the most changed since the edition began and recently received a change in the 2024 balanced data slate. Devastating wounds are now allocated after the unit has finished making all of its attacks. This means you have to allocate damage from regular wounds first, then devastating wounds afterwards. One of these weapons famed for this ability is the assault cannon, sending forth a hail of fire that can pierce into vitals. Weapons with this ability gain extra hits on critical hits equal to the value of the ability. Tesla carbines from Necron Immortals have this ability, meaning each critical hit causes 2 extra hits. These weapons are strong against hordes and offer a spam of fire. Normally a model can only fight with one melee weapon in the fight phase. However, melee weapons with this ability may also be used afterwards, striking extra attacks that can make the difference. Units like cavalry-styled units or monster riders like beast snaggers often have this ability to simulate the beast attacking in unison with its master. Weapons with this ability will cause a critical wound on an unmodified roll determined by the ability. They will also only affect certain units, such as monsters, infantry, or vehicles. The Grav Cannon has this ability against vehicle units on a 2+, allowing it to use their bulk against them and crush them. This means it will cause a critical wound on a 2+. This is very lethal if devastating wounds is also on the weapon. Some factions across Warhammer 40k have unique abilities tied to their weapons. One example is the one-shot ability, which is often found on the Hunter-Killer missile. The abilities will describe itself on the datasheet it is found on. Some are more exotic, like the snagged rule for the Orc Beast Snagger rigs, which often buff its charge on a hit, simulating a rig harpooning an enemy vehicle. There are probably plenty more out there, as each faction often has unique abilities to stand out. And that brings us to the end of the video. Thank you for watching.